No.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Jiva Live. My name is John Titus, and I have the honor of paneling and moderating this great panel of guests. I have William Doyle, our Chief Director of Sports Operations. I have Ceci Craft, and I have Bernie Holliday. I'm going to allow them at this time to kind of give you a little bit of background on our show today. Our show title today is Creating the Ideal Environment Through Leadership. I will say I worked really hard with Aaron LeBan behind the scenes on what is the appropriate title for today's conversation. We wanted to hit both on this constructive idea of what a proper environment is to promote learning, as well as kind of dive into this idea of what true leadership is, or leadership on the volleyball courts. With that said, throughout the show, we are broadcasting on Facebook. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, things you want to ask to our panelists, feel free to put those in the comments box. Aaron will transfer those to me, and I will be sure to get to as many of those as I possibly can. So with that said, Mr. Doyle, nice to see you again. If you could unmute yourself and just tell us, who in the world you are, as we already know who the great William Doyle is. Are you paused now, of course? Oh, bummer. All right, we'll get back to you, Bill, in just a little bit. All right, we're going to go to our next guest, Ceci Craft. Ceci, we know you worked as a mental performance coach for the Cleveland Indians in the past. You're currently working with the U.S. Army. Any more elaboration on that, or did I kind of steal your thunder already?
No, you're fine. Sure. So my background is...
I'm back. I just froze.
Here he is.
I think I'm back.
All right. Bill, can we go to Ceci real fast and we'll come back to you?
Absolutely.
All right, Ceci, go ahead.
Sure. So my background is applied sports psychology and physiology. I apologize up front. I'm a soccer player and I've worked with baseball and I've worked with the Army. So you're going to have to rely on Bernie for correct volleyball terminology. But so I spent 6 years pretty soon after grad school working for U.S. Special Forces Green Berets on Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Loved that, and then transitioned from there to professional baseball with the Cleveland Indians, and worked with their major league team for 6 years there on the mental performance side as a coach, and then have come back recently to working with the U.S. Army, and I'm the lead on a contract here doing mental performance for Green Berets. Again, Bernie has been a mentor for me for a long time, since I think 2008. When I first started working for the Army, and I'll let him introduce himself. But thank you so much for having me on, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Ceci. So, all right, back to Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle, do you want to give yourself a little bio, a little props? Don't hold back. You got a lot behind you.
No, I will hold back a little bit. I've been doing this for a long time, for 100 years. I'm currently the director of junior operations. Essentially, my title changes about every 3 days now. But for the Garden Empire region, we basically have all New York City, Long Island, up into Westchester, and the metropolitan area of New York, and the whole state of New Jersey. So we have like 12,000 members. I also run our high performance program. I also run our coaching development program and our player development program, and just so you guys have a little background, I also spent 4 years in the Navy, but I spent a good part of that time in riverine warfare and special forces in Vietnam and Cambodia. So when you have that kind of training, you talk about those kinds of trainings, I'll tune in a little.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Bill. And then Bernie, definitely curious about yourself too. I know you're the mental sports coach for the Pittsburgh Pirates. You've done some work with the Army as well. Would you like to share a little bit more, sir?
Absolutely. Yes. This is my 11th season with the Pittsburgh Pirates as their director of mental strength, which is basically sports psychology and peak performance psychology. So I got my PhD in sports psychology, which is really the study of peak performance and the psychology of excellence and what that's all about. And then started working at West Point right after that, and spent 4 years at West Point working with the cadet athletes on their mental game, basically their mental game applied to academics, applied to athletics, and applied to their military training. And what happened is after 4 years, they would start to graduate and go to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. They start calling back to my department saying, hey, the mental skills you taught us as athletes, can you teach us that as soldiers? Because we're about to deploy and we could use that training as well. So we started going out into the big Army, and that's where I met Ceci. I worked in the big Army teaching mental skills and teaching sports psychology professionals how to teach mental skills to the military for the last 2 years. And Pittsburgh Pirates came along, wanted to find out how the military does mental toughness, came across my program and said, hey, we'd love to get on the phone with you and chat. And that turned into a 3-hour conversation. About halfway through that, it turned into a job interview. And they said, you want to be a bucko? And that was 11 years ago. And I've been in professional baseball for more than 10 years now. Baseball is not my first language. My first language is probably tennis and volleyball. Those are the two sports that I know best. And volleyball is probably the sport I'm most passionate about. So I'm super excited to be here and to share with you guys and to learn from you guys as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Bernie. I appreciate it. So, all right, I'm going to start with this one. And Ceci and I talked about this a little bit off camera before, and Bill too. Mr. Doyle, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, is West Point technically in our region and wheelhouse, or is it just outside?
No, it technically is in our region.
Okay, cool. So I think that's a cool, feedback. You guys have already actually both worked in our region, whether you realize it or not. I've been on the Army campus, and Ceci and I talked about that a little bit before, and I adore that facility and my time there, and I thank you both for your time and service, with our armed forces. So I appreciate that as well, and Bill, your time there too, during your time in service. So thank you all. So with that said, let's start with an easy question. Ceci, where are you right now? What have you learned kind of from this crazy pandemic situation? And, I don't know, what kind of cool words of advice would you give somebody in this time of adversity?
This has definitely been an interesting time. And I think probably the biggest thing that stands out to me is you have to apply a different set of rules and adapt to the situation. So if you talk about, something in particular that Special Forces or Green Berets focus on, it's the ability to adapt to rapidly emerging situations. And I think this is certainly been when, Bill's been talking a little bit about everything getting pushed back or the different experiences he's having during this time. And I think that's true for all of us. So I'm in North Carolina. I am still supporting military training. We're doing a lot through video and then in person when we can and when it's safe to do so. But people's work atmospheres look like their home, and the home has been a place where we're with family, where we work out, where we work, where we do everything. And so I think that has a lot to do with resetting your expectations, being careful about your prioritization, being careful about being intentional about your boundaries and what you're doing. And has maybe made us think more deliberately about how we go about our days, or rethink how we go about our days and prioritize our days. I think the biggest piece of advice is, I would say, don't rule transfer your office rules to home or how life used to be to here. Give yourself the chance to settle in and reestablish a norm. And that'll probably be true for us for the next few months, is really paying attention to what's important to us now in the moment as the situation changes, and being willing to restack, reevaluate, reprioritize, and have the routines of our day evolve.
Yeah, no, I feel like the show could be over right now. That's great advice. So thank you very much. Bernie, same question after that great answer. Kind of where are you right now, both physically and mentally, and what have you learned from the last 3-4 months?
The thing that stands out most that I've taken away from this experience is the same piece that Ceci shared. Our greatest ability is our adaptability. And we've gotten a wonderful chance to flex the adaptability muscle over the last 4 or 5 months. So as I talk with teams now, instead of doing it face-to-face where I feel very comfortable, I'm now doing it over Zoom in situations like this. And I've really had to learn how to teach differently. I've had to try to do things in new and creative ways. I tried to engage and generate discussion in ways that I've never done before. So my own learning and growth has been incredible because of how much I've had to adapt my teaching to an on-screen, on-air kind of situation. So that's been really fun and challenging and hard and beneficial for my own growth. I think as I look forward to it as well, the thing that I've had the most challenge with is feeling guilty. That is very easy when you work at home and you're working at home, you feel guilty that you're not with your wife or your daughter. And then when you're with your wife and your daughter, you see your laptop in the corner of your eye and you're guilty that you're not doing work because you know this is work time and you should be doing work. So I think there's a ton of value in a situation like this to be able to set up proper boundaries and to set up proper routines and to be able to communicate effectively to your wife, to your spouse, to your kids, let them know these are the new routines. This is where I work and this is when I'm with my family, even though I'm always in my house. and to be able to kind of set those boundaries and have that kind of communication and dialogue, because it's very easy to overwork and under family when you're at home in situations like this.
No, fair enough. I think we're hearing a lot of the same thing about setting up boundaries, creating maybe a schedule or a routine, and when is it appropriate to do what activity. And I think those are all great things in this new normal, as Ceci kind of referred to before. Bill, same question. Where are you? And what are you kind of up to the last couple of months?
Well, I'm doing a lot of this stuff, way too much of this stuff, and fortunately, I have no children at home anymore. But my wife is working from home, and I fully understand when that cup of coffee she wants. Yeah, she wants it now because she got a Zoom meeting in 2 minutes, or whatever. We do things that way, and it no, she can't mow the lawn when I'm on Zoom, and no, I can't build the deck when she's on Zoom. Things like that. It's very, very different, and it's tough for old guys to learn new tricks. So this is a whole different world for me. So.
Yep. No, Bill, I think you've adapted great. We've worked together over the last couple months. The fact that you have a beautiful double rainbow behind you right now speaks volumes about how you've, truly, improved your Zoom ability. So I thank you for that and getting through this last, couple months with myself. So with that said, I think the best way to kind of open this up, and I want everybody to be aware, I know we gear towards the coaches in our region and our membership, but I think this is a great conversation that we're about to have for any teacher, anybody that aspires to be a leader or a leadership role. I kind of have a dual, hat that I wear. I'm a fourth grade teacher, elementary school teacher by day. I've been a college coach and a high school coach by night and a club coach by night. And, the one thing Bill and I always talk about is a good teacher, a good leader is a good teacher, is a good leader. And your classroom may change, but these things work in the workforce, on the court, in the classroom. These things will apply anywhere. So, if you have a teacher friend, a coaching friend, a player that aspires to be a coach, they should be listening into this conversation that's about to happen. So with that said, I'll kind of turn this over to Ceci and Bernie. One of the first topics you open up to is this idea of an outlier mindset. Now, we always hear as coaches and as teachers, the difference between a fixed mindset and, Carol Dweck and her growth mindset ideas. And I guess the best place to start is, let's assume the baseline. How would you define what a growth mindset is and a fixed mindset is? And then how do you transition it into, I guess, what you want to talk about is this outlier mindset?
Yeah, I'll jump in to start that. So, when you think, and Dweck defines it better than I ever can, but, fixed mindset, the belief that we are born with set talents or set abilities and that you either have it or you don't. So capability is fixed. Growth mindset being the belief that with effort and attention, we can grow and change our capability. And that, yes, you may be born with a certain amount of skill in different areas. We probably aren't all born equal, certainly not all the same height, but that with work, we get better at things. Certainly that's an incredibly important mindset. And I think is probably the beginning of a lot of even entering into sports psychology, and that sports psychology is a lot about what you're paying attention to and willing to look at in terms of strengths and weaknesses and grow at. But then if you can imagine a normal bell curve, and I'm going to get a little sciencey for people, or if you think about the idea that if you took the average height of men or women in the US, you would have a very few people that are, incredibly short on the low side, 4'8". You'd have a huge amount, your norm in the middle, that let's go with women. So maybe 5'4" to 5'8" or 9. And then you'd come down the other side of that slope into kind of the high side of that of not so many women that are 6'2" to 6'4". So the low side would be low outliers and the high side would be high outliers. Bernie and I have talked before about, when we talk about people that want to be amazing and elite at what they do, part of what you have to start to accept is you are going to be different than normal, right? So you're going to train differently than most people. You're going to train probably more. You are going to probably train with more attention, more focus. So both how you train, what you're willing to sacrifice, or how disciplined you're willing to be for your your sport's going to be probably higher. And then on the mental side, your mental game is going to be different from the average person. And so kind of this idea of letting go of average, letting go of wanting to be normal. And if you think about what normal is, it would also technically be mediocre. So letting go of mediocrity and moving towards that outlier side in terms of a more mindset, and embracing that outlier would also be another way of saying strange or abnormal, right? And we're talking abnormal on the high side of performance. But I think when you really delve into that, what does that mindset look like for someone to be elite? You realize that it really becomes a lifestyle. You have to think like an outlier to be an outlier, to train like an outlier to be an outlier. And so that's really the foundation of mental performance, is that we study outliers and that we specialize in the mindset and the creating of cultures and the creating of environments that allows for people to be outliers or be a community of outliers. Bernie, did I miss anything on that?
Not at all.
Awesome. So you talk about, this high performers, and I've heard both of you talk about this in the past. How do you get athletes, high performing athletes, to think differently, learn differently, fail differently, set up this idea of being able to have confidence, but break down their confidence and build it back up, take risks, the idea of self-talk. There's so many things we can go into on this. I've heard you both speak volumes about this. I mean, maybe we'll talk about, just that change in mindset about just performance in general. How do you get an athlete to start thinking about those things? Oh, Bernie, you want to try that one?
Sure. As you shared that question with me, a couple thoughts came to mind that I'll share with you guys. The first is that the game itself often becomes a great sounding board or launch pad for those discussions, because at least in baseball, I'm sure volleyball works the same way with club, and then going to college, then going to the national team tryouts, that as you go up to a different level, you go from being the giant fish in a very tiny pond, and now you become a bait fish in an ocean full of predators. And that's sort of that level to level progression that you experience, and the confidence takes a whack when you go through that kind of a progression. So for us, sometimes we just let the level generate that kind of an open door for us, and then we kind of jump through at that point. But what I've learned with a lot of my athletes is we like to use a lot of models. So we'll show world-class performers and how they give interviews where they talk about how they think in world-class ways. And to Ceci's point, they sound very different. And I think our athletes, when they first watch these world-class performers talk about how they think and how they focus and how they set goals, it catches them off guard. And they recognize that they don't think that way. They don't set goals that way. They don't focus attention that way. And that opens up a whole new realm for them. So they start to be able to look at themselves, look at their game in a different light. The other thing I think at our level, at least, is they've got a pretty good mental game already. They're probably 95% of the way there. And my challenge to those guys are, hey, what about the remaining 5%? What if we can dial in that last 5% of your mental performance, get that thing tuned up? Just think about the next level you can get to if you can get that last 5% down nailed. And that'll be something that I think guys get intrigued by, because it doesn't feel like it's a deficit model where we're trying to fix a weakness. It's, hey, it's all almost in place. Let's find that last piece of the puzzle and really get you going.
Fair enough. No, I like that a lot. So one of the things I've heard you talk about before, Ceci, is, and I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, is this idea of before anything else happens, you need this understanding of psychological or perceived safety and this trust or relationship to be able to learn and within this learning environment. Can you talk about that idea of, that understanding of safety before anything else happens?
I mean, I think that probably goes back a lot to permission to grow or permission to fail or permission to make mistakes. So we could talk about that growth mindset environment. If someone is so worried that failure will be indicative of getting yanked off a court or losing playing time, or that you are no longer a good athlete, or you're no longer the best at, I don't know, setting, serving, Bernie, help. But if that's the concern, then it's very hard to try new things. It's very hard to grow. It's very hard to try new technique. It's very hard to go all out and put a maximum effort into something. It's very hard to be part of a drill that's challenging and not want to say this is a stupid drill. So I do think that environment that says, hey, during practice today, we are looking to set a bar where some failure is going to occur, or you may not be able to do it off the bat. And what I'm asking is for continued effort and attention and work. And that is success in this drill. It's not it being done perfectly. It's maximum effort, maximum attention, and looking at closing that gap and getting closer to success as you're learning this skill. I think that that's a huge thing to give permission to athletes on, and also to set a culture for. Military, even I've heard a phrase, I don't mind someone making a mistake every day in hard training. You can't make the same mistake every day, but I want you to be training so hard that you're making a mistake every day and learning from it. Recently heard on a podcast, the brain is set up to learn from failure. It's actually, if we keep having successes, we kind of go on autopilot. And so I think setting that environment where failure is a very important part of things, and also creating a training environment, and we can, talk this even at another point, but I think sometimes we think we're building confidence by creating safe training environments where everyone has success. And I think it's false confidence. I don't think it's real. And I think, in fact, we're setting an environment where people think they have to have success to have a good practice.
Yep, fair enough. And, Bernie, I've heard you on other conversations talk about, this idea between the training mindset and the, let me check my notes, the trust mindset, or the trust idea. Is that kind of along the same lines as this?
It is in some regard, in that it's about taking a risk and being able to live with whatever follows. I like to use the phrase, have you earned the right to risk? And if the answer is yes, then you got to take the risk. I know a lot of players who go through their workday, they go through their practice, they go through their preseason, they've earned the right to take reasonable risks. But then when the time comes, they fail to pull the trigger because they want to play it safe. They don't want to look foolish. They're afraid they might blow it for their team. So the trick, going from training mindset, which is thinking carefully about what you're doing, analyzing it as right or wrong, judging it as a good or bad, and then making adjustments. That's the learning mindset where we bring skill in. And that's essential for an athlete and a coach to go through together, is that analyze it, criticize it, judge it, dissect it, break it down, and make it better. And that's that training mindset. But if we spend 99% of our practice analyzing, criticizing, judging, breaking down, and dissecting, mentally we develop a pretty strong habit of being overly analytical, overly critical, overly judgmental, and overly dissecting. And when we know we're supposed to be able to trust, let it go, play free, let it out, we have trouble because we've created that mental habit of wanting to be over analytical and over mechanical. So for us, a lot of it is learning how to practice the trusting mindset in a practice setting, where we're being able to make the adjustment without the judgment. We're able to be able to play the game with our eyes and sense and react, rather than using the frontal lobe to think and respond. So for me, I think that trusting mindset involves three things. It's coming up with a plan that you can have conviction around, executing that plan with reckless abandon, which means sort of a disregard for the outcome, and then absolute acceptance for whatever follows. To be able to say, so what next pitch? So what next serve? So what next point? Let's go.
No, I like it. And Bill, we've had constant conversations on this too. I think you kind of call it something different, but in essence it's the same. You have what we've talked about as training, and block training, and skill. But then we've talked about, you like this term of rehearse or recital or perform. Can you talk a little bit about your rehearsal idea, or your competitive, type drills?
Yeah, we actually, in our training facilities, when we have them, we talk about training and rehearsal center. So basically what we do is we talk about training, and then when you train, you rehearse that. And what I find the biggest problem is to get individuals to want to get past the social aspect of, she's better than us. She thinks she's better. He thinks he knows more. And so they don't want to enter into that risk category, because they're afraid that they're not afraid of losing skills, they're afraid of losing friends. And so that's a big battle for us. When we talk about it, like, people don't want to practice their play. They don't go to play practice, they rehearse it. And they get their, so that, and even, if I tell my kid, you got to go practice the piano, they're not going to do that. If I go, why don't you go rehearse that song you wrote? Yahoo, they're going to want to do that. So that's the kind of terminology we have. quick question I would have is, if I understand this concept of taking, there are a few select people that need to go to what you guys are calling the outlier mindset, that, that high performance mindset. How much unlearning, or is that a part of it, unlearning from what they already know, and replacement, what we used to call replacement behavior, plays into that. How do you get them to unlearn their routine and replace those behaviors? How important is that?
I think it depends a lot on where they're coming from and what performance environments they've been put in or have permission to be put in. So to some of your points, if this is someone that's come out of social settings where they've come up playing the sport always with their friends in kind of a more rec style, and let's say maybe they've been recognized as someone that's elite and maybe gets on, higher travel levels or things like that, where competition is a lot of what that team forms around, and winning is what that team forms around. That certainly can be a change that athlete's going to notice. And talking about, what are the expectations of playing at that level? What are the expectations for how you eat, how you sleep, how you prepare, how you practice, conditioning off the court? Those may all be things that you really need to talk about. I can tell you, even at a pro baseball level, part of actually where we started talking about outlier mindsets with our athletes was that they would leave in the off season and go back home to all their high school or college friends. And so part of where we created that language was to be able to say, you are going to notice that you are doing things differently. You have been part of the Cleveland Indians culture where everybody is trying to eat well, trying to train well. They know sleep's important. They're playing baseball every day. You've been around pro athletes. So this was our normal culture. You didn't even maybe notice it was outlier type culture. And now we're going to ask you to go home and you're going to feel different. And we want to give you permission to be different. We want to tell you that that's okay. And that when someone says, do you really have to eat that way? Or do you really have to train that day? Or really, can't you come out till 2 a.m. tonight? There's a reason you're saying, no, I do things my way. And it's okay to be proud of that. And then also, we'd even talk, there's a regression towards normal, right? And so when you look at that normal population, people in that normal bubble, people that are average, would like more people to be like them. So even if you think on your volleyball team, if you're the slowest person on that team, there's pressure to get faster. But if you're the fastest person on your volleyball team, people will probably give you a hard time about being so fast. And they kind of, jab at you to slow down. We like the group to be close. It's a human norm. So when you know that people are going to pull you back to normal and want to pull you back to normal, it maybe helps you maintain those habits that help separate you. And ultimately, if you want to be great at anything, whether that's volleyball or teaching or coaching, you're going to have habits that are different than normal.
So go ahead, Bernie.
I was going to say, Bill, I think as you shared that question, a great acronym came to mind I'd like to share with you that I think really speaks to that as well. It kind of takes Ceci's idea and kind of takes to more of a cultural place that we need to unlearn some of society's values and what society tells us we should value. And there's a great teacher, educator by the name of Tim Elmore, who's done a lot of work with the IY and the Generation Z group and how do you get through to them. And he talks about today's scene, and that's the acronym SCENE, and how today's scene can be sort of an obstacle to peak performance. And I think that's the thing we have to unlearn. We have to unlearn what the scene is and to kind of create an alternative scene. So S is speed, that our society, we value speed. So anything deemed slow must not be valuable. C is convenience. We want things easy. And then anything that comes hard must not be valuable to us. E is entertaining or enjoyable. We want things to be fun. And if something's boring or rote, then it must not have value in my life anymore. N is nurture. We want people to fight our fights for us and protect us and keep us safe. So therefore, risk must be bad. I don't want anything to do with risk. And then E is entitlement. We want to be given things. We feel like we're owed things. So therefore, earning must be bad. I don't want anything to do with earning it. And when you look at that, when you think about that's what society values right now, that's what our kids coming into our gyms have been told by their friends, families, by the media. And you think about what world class is. World class is the exact opposite. World class is extremely, it takes a very long time. It's extremely hard. It's about doing footwork drills, blocking drills, transition drills every single day, all year long. So it's extremely boring at times. You can feel like you're in the same rope drill over and over again. It's all about taking risks, taking chances, and ultimately owning what you get at the end of the day, owning your results. So what we try to do with the Pirates and with the teams that we're a part of is we try to create this alternative scene, this alternative culture. And a lot of that is the unlearning process, to be able to unlearn those things that society values and to put in place, to Ceci's point, more outlier values.
No, I love all this. So we've got a couple of great questions already from Facebook, and I'm trying to figure out, quickly how to put them all together. So the first question I think we can take on is, how would you define the difference between, or how would you talk to your team or player about the permission to grow versus the permission to fail? And what avenue would you take and why? I'll leave that either to Ceci or Bernie to take that one on.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, I don't know if I'd have that conversation with them as much as I would want my coaches to model it for them. So I'll tell you a story that kind of brings this to light. Me and my team of 4 mental training coaches, whenever we do anything together, we always do what's called a 1 up, 1 down. So I'll get my 3 guys in the room and we'll talk, hey, what was 1 up from my discussion, my conversation with that team? Okay, you got 1 down for me. What can I do better next time that maybe didn't hit? And the coaches would often say, hey, can we sit in the back of your session and watch and learn? My answer was sure, but you got to give me a 1 up, 1 down at the end of it. And at the end of it, I'd go up to the coach and say, hey, I hope you enjoyed it. What's my 1 up, 1 down? And he would give me 5 ups and 0 downs. And I very quickly realized that people are uncomfortable giving critical feedback. They want to tell me all the things they liked, but they don't really want to go into any of the areas where I could have been better, where I could have improved. And after I push and push and push, finally they go, oh, well, I guess, Bernie, you could have talked more slowly. You speak so fast, our Spanish players can't keep up with you. Okay, thank you for making me grow. And I'm very careful in how I honor that critical feedback. And we would do that for a couple of times. And what was really neat, though, for me is I'd find out that one of my hitting coaches or one of my pitching coaches would have a bullpen session or a cage session. And I'd say, hey, can I sit in the back and just watch a coach? And they said, sure. So I'd go into the bullpen, I'd watch the pitching coach and the pitcher work together on 40 pitches, and they're coaching and they're competing. And at the end of it, I'm walking through the outfield with the pitching coach, and he turns and looks at me and goes, Bernie, do you have a 1 up, 1 down for me? And I was like, wow, this is really cool, because, I was able to do it and show my vulnerability to grow, show my willingness to grow by allowing them to talk about my faults. And that modeling gave him permission to ask me that same question back. And what was cool was, a couple of weeks later, I heard him asking the pitchers that. After the bullpen, he'd ask his pitcher, hey, as your coach, give me a 1 up, 1 down on how I've coached you. So it became sort of this top down, trickle down of being vulnerable, modeling vulnerability in order to grow, modeling taking those risks and possibly failing during those risks to grow. And when the leaders do it, and the leaders ask for it, and the leaders respond effectively to it, then it gives everybody else permission to follow suit. And I thought it was a very cool experience for me to experience that and to learn from that moment.
Yep. And I think, Ceci, I've seen you talk about this in the past as well as, I think in one of your podcasts, I read about, teachers taking risks and doing things that they were uncomfortable with, and leaders doing things they were uncomfortable with. And it wasn't the fact of acquiring a new skill. It was seeing their coaches or leaders struggle with failure and how they work through failure, and growing in that process and talking and narrating through it about the learning process, in a sense, teaching their students or players, how to learn. And, could you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think that's really important. So I think both reminding ourselves what it's like to learn and what it's like to fail, and finding those moments within our own lives. When I first met Bernie, I think you were starting ultra marathons, but had never run a marathon before.
Yes.
And so, great example of someone that was putting himself out there to probably experience some pain and growth and failure. Bernie, I think, still ultra marathons, but that's something he can talk to his players about. I speak about being dyslexic when I was growing up, but I think we have to look for those areas as coaches and people working with around athletes that we are asking to put themselves out there and expose themselves and have these high stress failure moments in front of others. We have to remember what that feels like. And then also, I think, how we model those moments where we fail, because inevitably we do. Inevitably we have a bad reaction to something. I had a baseball coach that didn't cared so much about his players. He was actually managing one of our minor league teams, and the players started to tell me that, when they made a mistake, particularly in the batter's box, they would realize if they looked over at him, he was absorbing their pain, but the facial expression was kind of, and so they felt like they had disappointed their manager. He didn't mean it that way. He didn't even realize he was doing it. And it was pretty amazing to be able to have the conversation about it, but then also the way he addressed it with his players, both explaining where he was coming from. It's because I hurt with you and I care. He had played pro baseball as well. But then also, hey, I'm going to work on this. So let me know if you're noticing it, because I'm not trying to impact your at bat. I'm not trying to impact how you play, and I'm getting better as a coach too. So I think we have to look for those moments where we can empathize with the situation or have enough closeness to the situation where we can also appreciate that. One of my pet peeves is when people say you should enjoy failure. And I don't tend to enjoy failure. I realize it's necessary, but it's painful. And so I think you also have to go to look at that player and say, yes, it absolutely sucks right now. Absolutely. I have every faith you will crawl your way out of this hole, but I'm not going to sugarcoat the fact that it probably feels like you're in a 6-foot hole right now. And I think that's important too.
Yeah. So I think it's important to tell our coaches, and I think I've heard both of you speak on this. If you want a behavior from your team or from your player, you have to model that same behavior, no different than feedback. I think a lot of us as coaches strive for, hey, my players, I want feedback from you guys, then, or you want to give feedback, then you also have to accept feedback as well. And I think you guys both speak on that too. And just being open to, if you want something, you have to also accept it too. And you have to be a role model in every aspect of that. And I think that's truly important. And I think that's a great message that you guys have as well. Bill, do you have, it looked like you had something to chime in on that.
I would actually wanted Bernie to chime in on the concept of embracing the suck. that whole area of how do you get young people, especially when you're seeing them 2 days a week, 3 days a week, for a couple hours, an hour and a half, couple hours. How do you get them to move to that concept? How do you get them to move to that area where they're willing to do that?
Yeah, the concept first I'll describe for those who are watching and following along. Embrace the suck is actually a term that we've borrowed from the military. And it has two components, I would say, to it. The first is being able to endure and persist through tough times, through challenges better than anybody else, and taking pride in your ability to persist and fight through adversity and keep moving forward. So there's the persistence piece of it. But I think the second part of Embrace the Suck is really the learning element of it, that we need to seek out challenging, hard, difficult moments, opportunities, challenges, so that we can put ourselves in those situations, fumble over ourselves, trip over ourselves, and ultimately learn from that experience. A lot of times it's easy, I think, if you look at the comfort zone bubble. It's easy to stay in our comfort zone. There's no suck there. There's no learning that's happening there. And you're not learning how to persevere, persist, or show any kind of resilience there. So there's an outer bubble, which is sort of that growth bubble just outside your comfort zone. And that's where I want guys to be. And I think to your point, Bill, we want to find ways to get athletes into that gap that's just outside their comfort zone, but not so far out that we snap them and break them like a rubber band. So it's that sweet spot of not pulling too hard at first, getting guys just outside the comfort zone, keeping them there, and then coaching them through that discomfort, coaching them through that kind of a grind that they're going through. There's something that I think it was Coyle talks about, having the sort of sweet spot of learning where you're having 50 to 80% successful reps during your practices. And I think if you got guys who are a little bit more fragile in their confidence, a little bit more inconsistent in their confidence, you might need to keep them closer to that 80% success rate. And they're still failing 20%. They're still embracing the suck 20% of the time. I think people that have more robust confidence, they have a better sense of who they are and what they stand for, and they can handle failure better. You can probably push them more to that 50% failure zone and get them into embracing the suck that way. So I think that 50 to 80 gives you a lot of flexibility depending on how your athletes handle adversity and how much confidence they can sustain through adversity.
I like this concept, and I think it's really important for coaches to understand that too. If you're running a drill, a very blocked or very skill-specific drill, and it looks beautiful. It looks perfect. Coaches, that's a bad drill. It should not look like that. You should practice ugly, and that's a whole different concept as well. But kind of along the lines of Bernie was talking about, that's not a good practice, guys. You should train ugly. Cece, anything more on that per se? It looked like you had something to chime in on.
Yeah, I think Bernie hits on, confidence levels. And one thing that actually I will be very explicit about, and that our coaches became explicit about, was okay, so what is confidence, right? And do we need perfection to feel confident? And a lot of what I heard when I first came into baseball is success must precede confidence. And Bernie and I have talked about, okay, so then what is actual real confidence? And I've kind of played with the terminology that I think helps make it easy. And that I say that I think there's not all confidence is created equal. There's junk food versions of confidence, and there's healthy foods of confidence. And they're all food, right? But junk food is the stuff that is sugary, it comes fast, and it burns away quickly. And so if you think about, for pro athletes, it's oftentimes what Twitter says about you, but it's the attaboy that a coach gives for no really good reason. It's the drill that's really easy that we think builds confidence. Baseball's version of that for me is batting practice. For you, it might be the blocking drill that every single one of your players can do. And so it's 100% success rate. Everyone thinks they're great. The problem with that junk food is when you go into a game where someone gets challenged and it doesn't look that pretty, the confidence evaporates so quickly. And they know that they weren't set up to compete. They know that the confidence that they were given has not actually prepared them for challenge. And so just like eating sugar, you get a sugar low pretty fast, and it's really uncomfortable and not fun and not easy to work out of. And your confidence has basically failed you. So no matter how high your junk food confidence was going in, it drops pretty fast. I think the other side of that, and that I think gets at Bernie's concept of seen as well, is this version of healthy food confidence. So health food confidence is just like health food. It takes a while to prepare. You might have to chop fresh vegetables. You might have to go to the grocery store. You might have to do a meal plan on it. And you have to work harder to cook it. You don't just stick it in the microwave. You got to actually cook it on a stove. And so it takes a while to prepare, and you have to be thoughtful about how you're building it. And even as you eat it, it doesn't taste great, not as good as the sugary stuff, but it lasts and it burns with you. And so when you think about, I think it's really important on the coaching side, how are you giving back feedback? How are you building confidence? Are you building healthy confidence, or are you building junk food confidence, both in how you speak to your players, but also the skills you build for them and what you tell them prepares them for success? And I would rather have athletes go into a competition with less healthy confidence than I would with a ton of junk confidence. And I just think it's more deliberate, and it's difficult to do. But I think if you talk to your athletes up front about the fact that we are going to build healthy confidence here, and that means that, and healthy confidence comes from being challenged, they're more likely to accept that harder drill. So when you say up front, this is not going to be easy, I expect 50% failure. And what I want you to have confidence in is your ability to continue to work even though you're facing failure. That's what real confidence is. That's a really different message than you should feel confident because you had 100% success at this drill.
Right, and I agree. And I think I've heard you both talk about this before, is, it kind of gets towards the idea of, focusing on the process and the skill development versus the result. And as coaches, don't go, hey, great job, versus, hey, I really like the way you angled your platform, would be the difference in that of, I think you both referred to that a boy or that a girl, versus truly giving them real feedback. And I think that's truly important for all our coaches. So another question that comes from our Facebook panel is, if I have a player that is coming from a home or parents with a fixed mindset, what would you say or work with them on trying to develop that growth mindset and understanding? And how would you get them to try to balance that between their home life and their life when they enter the court with you or the playing field with you? Tough question for either of you. Ceci or Bernie, feel free to chime in.
We've had conversations with our players, and this is more of an adult approach. I'm sure it can be tweaked to work with junior players as well. Just the language we would use would probably be a little bit different, but we give our players permission to pull a BS card. And what I mean by that is, first of all, we talk through what are fixed mindset traps that we're going to hear in society, that we might hear from our parents, that we might hear from former coaches, phrases like God-given ability, or stuff you just can't teach, or innately talented. All of these phrases you hear a lot, or man, you're just so incredibly gifted. And we make sure that our players understand this long list of these phrases that really capture a fixed mindset. And now we challenge them to go back home, and whenever they're in their home, whenever they're with their friends, whenever they're with their friends' parents, and they have somebody say, man, I wish my kid was as talented as you. I wish my kid was born with your God-given abilities, that they can call the BS card. And not outright to say, hey, BS, but internally to be able to catch it and call BS. And at the same time, I think it's very important for us as coaches and leaders to be able to build up our vocabulary of growth mindset terms. Hey, that was a great persisting there. Hey, that was great effort there. Hey, I appreciate you continuing to persist and try and adapt to that drill. Keep giving effort, keep up that great attitude, even though you're going through a tough time. As coaches develop that bigger list of growth mindset terminology, that they can use that more and more often when they get into the gym, and then challenge the players to call the BS card anytime they're in society and they hear fixed mindset phrases, or even on Twitter or on Instagram or on TV, to start to pull that internal BS card, so they start to recognize fixed mindset moments more often and how they're surrounded and bombarded by them. I find with my daughter all the time, I'm going to these fixed mindset places when I'm encouraging her. Sweetie, oh, you're so smart. Oh, sweetie, you're so talented. Oh, you're so intelligent. Instead of, hey, you're such a hard worker. Hey, you're grinding and persisting and doing a great job of just keeping at it. And I got to catch myself all the time when I go to that fixed mindset phrases, even though I think it's a good intention, but I end up jamming myself up, and I know I'm jamming her up.
I think to jump on Bernie's point too, language matters. I think sometimes it's, if you are recognizing, and you might even hear it from the stands from a parent, how they're cheering on or commenting on their kids' ability, realizing what you say matters. And then one of the things the military has is an AAR, an after action review, or a chance to debrief something. And I do have to say, catching someone in the moment, when they've gone through a challenge or where they've done something really well, like persisted, kept up effort when the game was not a fun game to play, being able to catch them and say, hey, what did you see there? And then saying, this is what I saw. If you've got a relationship with that player, you provide another avenue and another way to think about things. And so I think it's important to realize, home will make a big influence over someone's mindset. Home will make a big influence over what someone deems success and failure. That's a huge influencer. But you also have an opportunity to provide another avenue, another interpretation of the same situation, and create a space where what you saw in that game was amazing effort and persistence in a battle that everyone knows was a losing battle. Or even on the good side, what you saw is someone that never dropped effort and was tenacious the entire time you guys were winning a game. Catch those successes, leverage those, and you can give an alternative perspective on it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've heard you both talk in the past about this idea of feedback, and you kind of put it into two categories of, I guess, proximal feedback and distilled feedback. Of proximal of, hey, these are the mechanics, the skill adjustments I can make, versus that bigger growth mindset of, what do you see? How can you grow? And into that growth mindset idea, can you expand on coaches, how coaches can say something as simple as, what did you see? Why did you do that? What can you do better? And kind of that process, along, just getting players to think the game further than just as movements and kinesthetics. Barney, you want to share that one?
Ceci, you got anything?
I can go if you need me to, but
jump in. Yeah, I'll gather my thoughts.
Okay, so I think there's a couple of things. One of my feelings is, if you don't want your player thinking mechanically in that moment, then don't jump in with mechanical feedback in that moment. And Bernie maybe can hit on this even from a think box, play box perspective. But I think your ability to even learn to trust yourself as an athlete and learn your own assessment of the game and make your own changes. I mean, that's starting to master things. And so as a coach, giving permission for the player to problem solve themselves and see the court, see how decisions are made, see what adaptations they might need to make, debrief their own game, have ownership over their own performance. I think that there are levels or ages where that becomes more and more appropriate, or moments where that becomes more and more appropriate. But I also think it's incredibly important for a player to trust themselves. We've all watched that young athlete that spends half the game glancing over to their coach and looking for permission or looking for what to do next. And that's a player that's not able to trust themselves. That's a player that's needing external feedback, and they never get to just be fully trusting and playing the game. And so I think we want to be thoughtful about what kind of feedback we're giving and at what point the player's ready and we're capable of handing ownership back to that player. Does that answer kind of the question you were getting at?
And I like that a lot. And then, as far as that kind of alludes into one of our Facebook questions was, how do you define and how do you teach players about what is acceptable risk? And I think that's a cool concept to go into as well.
Yeah, when I was spending time with John Mayer and down in LMU for a while, and he shared this concept that I've never heard of before called reasonable risk. Mm-hmm. And I like that phrase, reasonable risk, and that we want our athletes taking reasonable risks. And there's a time to take the reasonable risk, and then there's just being reckless. And that's where it comes back to, I think, that idea of have you earned the right to risk? So have we taken those risks in practice? Have I extended myself to the point where I know where I'm going to fail? So I know how far I can go out on the edge before falling off of it in practice. And as a result, I'm starting to make that risk more reasonable. I'm starting to understand exactly where I can go and how far I can go. And I think it also kind of plays out to the idea of good mistakes and bad mistakes. And it's kind of a weird concept, but I guess a bad mistake or an unacceptable mistake would be hitting a serve into the net, because you're not going to win a point if you hit a serve into the net. Now, if you hit a serve long, there's a chance that somebody might touch it and spray it out of bounds as it's just going long. There's a chance that it may just go 3 or 4 inches long, but the referee might call it in. So things can happen. Good. Same thing when you're hitting. If you hit high off a fingertip versus hitting into the net, you're not going to get a call. Hitting off the fingertip, you might get a line call that goes your way. You might get a touch call that goes your way. So recognizing that there are reasonable risks and a positive way to take versus just making a mistake that's not going to come of any good. It's a lot like with throwing a baseball from second to first. If you throw it too low, the guy could scoop it off a short hop. If you throw it too high, he's not going to catch it. It's going to go over his head into the stands. So kind of recognizing some of those as aspects of reasonable risk as well. We're going to take this risk and it might play out in my favor, even if it doesn't go well, versus if I take this risk and I blow it, there's no chance it's going to work out well at all for us.
I like that a lot. Ceci, anything else to follow up on that? Or
just say one of the things that I watched Tito do incredibly well with the Cleveland Indians is from time to time, the memory that comes to mind is we had a rookie that went to steal a base and he got called out. And Tito's post-game interview was absolutely amazing. He said, listen, I've watched it both in moments where it cost us something in a game and moments where it didn't. And he says, especially as you're coming up in a level and a game's increasing in speed, a player and athlete needs that moment to try out how this fits them. And they need moments, I want them to read games. I want them to have permission to go be aggressive and try to go after success. I don't want to put a red light on that. And they're going to learn to read the game. They're going to have to learn from this moment. So hopefully they're seeing X, Y, and Z. But I loved how publicly he gave permission for that person to push against the walls and the confines and kind of learn where they're currently at. And if they need to, increase skill or capability at whatever that is, then now they've got the feedback. Hey, they got caught trying to steal. So now they need, there's things they need to improve on. So I think that can be big for a coach too, recognizing that moment where someone did take a risk and appreciating the mindset that went into someone that's willing to risk. And then also helping them read the situations, read the game, learn the game better.
Right, and then you have the back of a coach saying it's okay to take that risk in front of an entire media staff. That's huge, and allows them to take that risk again, in a more productive way. Now, Ceci, you replied, or you talked about previously about this concept of think box and play box. Did you want to redefine that, or kind of go into that a little bit more about that idea?
I'm going to leave that one to Bernie. He's the master behind that one.
Well, it's a neat concept that when I shared it with volleyball coaches, they immediately perked up. I shared it with tennis coaches, they immediately perked up. And then I shared it with my hitting coaches and pitching coaches, and they immediately perked up. So it seems to resonate with a lot of coaches and a lot of players from various sports, where there's this start-stop component where you've got 15 seconds between points, then you've got a 6 to 8 to 10 second point, and then you've got another pause in the action. And it came from Annika Sorenstam, who's one of the best female golfers in the history of women's golf. She's the only one to ever shoot a regulation 59 on the women's tour. And we saw her, I guess you would say it's her swing coach and her mental coach, as the keynote speakers at a conference about 5 years ago. And somebody asked them the question, why was Annika so good and dominant for so long? And her coaches said, well, she just got really good at think box, play box, and that discipline that it requires to use think box, play box. And I took some notes and I thought, this is kind of interesting. Fast forward 5 years, last year, Annika herself was the keynote at that same conference. And somebody asked her the same question, how could you dominate for so long at your sport? And Annika said very simply, I just got really freaking good at this thing I call think box, play box. And I'm like, I've heard this before. I've written this down before. This sounds important. And she went on to describe, and you can think about this serving. You can think about this in serve receive. My hitters think about this as they're stepping into the box. My pitchers think about this stepping onto the rubber. So when I describe Annika, you can kind of put yourself into that position. So she says, when I get to the ball, I put my clubs down in a certain spot, and that's my think box. It's this invisible box or square where I'm doing my thinking, my analyzing. I'm thinking about the lie. I'm thinking about the pin placement. I'm thinking about the wind. I'm thinking about what kind of spin I want on my shot and what kind of angle I want on my shot. And I'm also even doing some second guessing or doubting, some worrying, some apprehension in my think box place. And then I make this decision. I'm going to hit this club this way to that target. And that's when I cross what I call my decision line. I've made my decision. I grab my club and I step forward and address the ball. Now I'm in my play box. No more thinking. I've made my decision. I've committed to it. I'm going to see my ball, see my target, and go. And she said a lot of golfers will end up thinking too much in the play box, and others will end up playing too much in the think box and not have a plan to be able to commit to. And she goes, I think the best golfers get really good at sort of differentiating when they're in the think box, when they cross that decision line, and now they're in play box mode, where they're in that ability just to commit with this conviction. And somebody asked her, well, what happens if you're in the play box and thoughts start creeping into your mind? And she said very simply, I step back into my think box. I spend another 20 to 30 seconds reassessing my plan, decide if I want to keep that club or change to a different club because of the wind. And when I'm ready, I step back into the play box, I see ball, I hit ball. And when I shared that with some of our serve receivers in volleyball, they were like, man, I'm in the think box all the time when I'm thinking when I'm in the play box mode all the time. And my servers back on the back line would say, man, I'm about to hit the ball and I'm thinking in my play box. So our coaches started to become very disciplined in when they would coach their players. And they would actually pull the player out of their play box, give them some coaching cues or instruction, and then say, okay, get back into the play box and go. And it was fascinating. Betsy Flint, who's one of the beach coaches at LMU, she actually drew 2 circles in the sand and said, this is your play box. This is where you serve receive on the court. And I don't want you thinking in here. If you're going to think, take a step back and ask the ref for time for a second or two. And when you're ready, step forward into your circle. And now you're in play box mode. Now you're playing the game with your eyes, not your frontal lobe. And as I watched her go through that practice, what was really cool was she started talking about their platform or how they were taking that first step to the ball. And she realized she was coaching them and talking to them about mechanics while they're standing in their play box. And she said, wait a minute, take a step out, come here. Now look at the platform, look at this first step. Okay, now get back in play box and show me it. And she started to differentiate this play box mode where it's all about letting it happen versus think box where I'm thinking about what I'm going to do and I'm thinking about my mechanics. And what's funny about the human mind is it does a very good job of creating association. It can associate something with something else. So what happens is if we're coaching our players when they're in their play box, when they're standing about to serve receive, when they're standing about to serve, when my guys are standing in the box with the bat here or on the mound with the ball here ready to pitch, and we're throwing coaching cues and triggers and mechanical thoughts at them, their brains start to associate those places with a place to think a lot. I'm standing at this place. I get coached a lot here. This is where I need to do all my self-coaching and all my self-instruction, all my self-analysis. So our coaches have gotten really good recently at separating, even coaching them in the think box and then telling them, hey, get in the play box and give it a shot. And I'm going to shut up now and let you play in the play box. So it was really cool to see them adapt it from a player to actually how a coach could coach.
Cool. Yeah, I think, Bill, you had a question about this think box, play box idea?
Well, I guess first I want to say thank you, because we've used this pretty effectively. And we had basically a quick story. I actually went to one of the dollar stores or whatever and bought packages of these little gift boxes, and we paired them together. And one's the thinking box and one's the playing box. And when a kid actually demonstrates that they understand the concept and they can demonstrate the concept, they get to go pick up their boxes and they go to take them home and then they remember them. But I guess we have very limited time to work with the kids. You know, sometimes 2 days a week for an hour and a half, 3 days a week for 2 hours, whatever. How much time do you spend on this mental part of the thinking box and playing box and all those kinds of stuff? Yeah, I mean, I also want to tell you they have no idea how much effect this has had. It was really great stuff. But how much time do you spend working on that stuff?
Ceci or me?
Either one.
Go for it, Bern. You start.
Actually, both. I get two answers. Two for the price of one.
I don't know, Bill, if I'm actually going to answer your question. I think I'm going to try to, but I may got to go off on a tangent. I think there might be value in that anyway. But for me, a lot of it is really getting really good at the 15 seconds between points. And I talk about that with my ball players, getting really good at the 15 seconds between pitches. And I think in volleyball, you've got about 15 seconds before the up ref blows the whistle and you got to serve and start the point. And for me, it's being able to commit to something in that 15 seconds. That's really all that you have to do in that 15 seconds is recommit to something, whether that's doing this with my platform or this with my first step or this with how I'm going to hit a flat, clean serve. But you got to recommit to something in that 15 seconds. And I often talk about the 3 R's. And I think this is kind of moving from think box to play box. Is the first R is there's going to be a reaction after a point. Whether you get blocked or whether you put the ball straight down, there's always going to be an emotional reaction, and that's very natural. But you've only got 15 seconds. You got to get past the reaction into what I call resetting and then recommitting. And those are the 3 R's that have to happen in that 15 seconds. I think too many times people get stuck in that first R and they react, and then suddenly the game speeds up and they're still in think box mode as that up ref's blowing the whistle and saying, hey, it's time to begin. So I think even though it doesn't answer your question exactly, Bill, I like them practicing how they attend to that 15 seconds between points all the time. Anytime there's sort of a scrimmage style game, I want them thinking about getting through the reaction, being able to reset, which is getting ready for the next pitch or the next point or the next serve, and then recommitting to something. What's the one thing you're recommitting to? Because if you commit to 5 or 10 things, you're not committing to anything. Mike Schmidt, the famous baseball player from the Phillies, third baseman, always talked about having his last conscious thought. And that's his phrase for it was, as I step into the box, I have one last conscious thought. And then I go free and I play sensory baseball with my eyes. And he said his last conscious thought was always hit a line drive off the pitcher's kneecaps. And that was his last conscious thought. And I think that's what I want my players on the volleyball court to think about is as they go through that 15 seconds, whether it's in practice or in games, are you able to get to the point where you have your last conscious thought, you've committed to something, and now you're ready to be in play box mode and go. And that's what I think there's tons of value in practicing and building in as part of that fluid practice and that scrimmage style practice you guys have.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I would say Bernie and I are lucky in that we've gotten to work around athletics and we've been mental performance coaches that are roaming the field. And so, ideally the mental part of your day or your practice or your game is forever present. That being said, I think probably, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and Bernie, you can shake your head if you disagree, but I think the most impactful thing is when coaches realize that they are constantly coaching the mental game, whether or not they realize it. And as a coach, you're absolutely essential. And so when you're talking techniques or skill or running drills, you want to be conscious and deliberate about, are you introducing a place where there's possibility of failure? Did you pick a drill where you're going to see some? Are you ready to respond in a way that's going to allow your athletes to continue to push hard and exert effort and accept failure and reset quickly and keep going in that drill? Are you giving them, are you coaching them on the ability to find their last conscious thought, as you're putting into serving? So to me, it's happening fluidly throughout a practice at all times. In my perfect world, the coach is putting together kind of what their practice schedule looks like, but they've probably got, a physical, a fundamental, and a mental component to each one of those drills that they're thinking through of what am I hitting on all of those levels that just feels fluid to my players, because the mental side shouldn't be separated out from the rest of it. It should be a fluid part of how we're training athletes every day.
Just as somebody that answered a question that I wasn't smart enough yet to ask. So that was great stuff. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. So another question we have from Facebook that kind of gets along to this, and I'm going to paraphrase it as best I can, is, so we obviously have a very unique baseball season that's about to happen because of pandemic. Along the same lines, we have a very unique volleyball season that is about to happen for our junior athletes. What would be your best advice, or how would you have them take on that new adversity, or what would your advice to them be in this new setting? And that goes to, I'll start with Ceci on something like that.
Oof, so I don't have to deal with baseball season in the same way that I normally do coming in. So, but I would say maybe even coming full circle back to the beginning of the conversation is lay out the expectations, like prep the battlefield, prep the playing field with your players coming in. If they have had ways to practice or train on their own, or if that's expected at their level, then maybe talking about what that is and where you want the team to come together and join together, and what your hopes, goals, aspirations are in the season. If they're young enough where really they're going to get together for the first time, I think it's important to really think, what is the outcome of this season? Having social interaction when kids have not had it for a really long time may be one of the most important things for a rec volleyball team right now. Getting a chance to exert and have effort, or you may know that your players are going to come in not as good shape as they normally would. I think it's just important to recognize that this is a different situation and think about, intentionally, for you, what are you hoping for your team in this season? And then maybe even talking to your team about what are their expectations for the season, knowing that this is abnormal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bernie, same question. We have a very unique situation here. What have you done in the baseball, or what would you do in the military field, or in the volleyball field for us? How do you plan for the unexpected?
Yeah, I've got a saying I'll share with you, and I think it applies to this pandemic and this weird-looking baseball season and volleyball season we have ahead of us. The phrase is, don't let your first time be your first time. Mm-hmm. And it goes to the idea of mentally rehearsing the weirdness that you're about to experience. I think about Michaela Schifrin, who's one of the most famous downhill skiers of all time, and she's currently competing now, so she's probably the GOAT of female skiing. Lindsey Vonn used to always kind of hold that title, and Michaela Schifrin is moving into that role as the greatest of all time downhill skier. And she had tremendous pressure during her first Olympics. And people are asking her, you're expected to medal, you're expected to win gold. This is your first Olympics, you're only 18 years old. How are you going to handle all this pressure? And she goes, well, everybody asked me how I'm going to handle this pressure. And to me, it's my 1,000th Olympics. It's not my first Olympics, because I've been there in my head 1,000 other times. So for me, it's my 1,000th time that I've been to the Olympics. And I've always liked that story because it highlights the fact that don't let your first time be your first time. She's played through that Olympic experience over and over again in her head before she ever showed up at the Olympic Village for the first time. So for my baseball players, I hope they've played 20 or 30 games in their mind in front of an empty stadium with no smell of popcorn, with no smell of hot dogs. And to be able to hear the conversations in the opposing dugout so clearly because there's no other noise, and to hear the crack of the bat so clearly because of just the voidness. And I want them to play a mental game of baseball every day in that scenario, so that when they finally have to do it, it feels more commonplace. There's a little bit of a deja vu experience to it, and it doesn't freak them out. I guess the one other thing I'll share with you is a story that Clint Hurdle, our former big league skipper at the Pittsburgh Pirates, used to talk about. He said, every day you're going to get 3 bad hops. And you probably don't deserve them. You probably don't expect them. You probably haven't trained for them, but you're going to get 3 bad hops every day in life. And it's how you handle those 3 bad hops is going to determine how your day goes. And I think that statement holds true for coaches and players more than ever going into this fall season. What this might look like is you got to expect 3 bad hops or more. And how you handle those bad hops that you didn't expect or didn't deserve are really going to determine how your day goes. So to me, I think to Ceci's point is setting up the expectations of bad hops. And what are we going to do when we get them?
Yep. Well said. Well said. So we actually flew by. I can't believe we're already at 70 minutes right now. So I appreciate both of it. So what I'm going to do right now is kind of give each of you your last dues on, your last at bat on, what you guys have to say for, to the rest of our membership, to our coaches in the region. And, really thank you both for your time, and Bill as well. So I'll start with, Bill Doyle. Do you have any last questions or last thoughts you want to give to our audience?
I hope you're paying attention, and I hope you're listening, and I hope you're willing to go out and take some risks and understand what's doable and what's not doable. I will tell you that I listen to these people all the time because I've got a long way to go, and if I've got a long way to go, and I've been doing this for more than a month, I think you guys should be listening to this stuff, listening to the podcast, listening to that, and growing yourself. I think that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Yeah. So Bernie, any your last at bat, any other final thoughts, and where can we listen to more if we want to as well?
Sure. I'll tell you a story that I think really kind of puts a nice exclamation point on this conversation. I was going to give a talk on how do you develop leadership through sport, and I wasn't the expert, but I was at West Point, which is a leadership institution. So I thought I'm going to go talk to the coaches that do this for a living. So I grabbed a guy named Jim Poling, a men's tennis coach at West Point. He's been coaching for 40 years. He's a wonderful man. And I asked Jim over lunch, how do you develop leadership through tennis? And Jim immediately got frustrated looking. He got discouraged. He started shaking his head. And I said, what's up? And he goes, I don't even know if I do anymore, Bernie. Every year I do this, I feel like I have less and less impact on these young men. And now I wonder if I have any impact at all. I mean, I've been doing this so long, I feel like all I'm doing is screwing up and they're not really responding to me. And then he paused. And then he chuckled. And then he said, well, Bernie, just last week I had a player call me out of the blue I haven't talked to in 10 years. And I picked up the phone and he said, Coach, I called to tell you were right about everything. Now I need to hang up and call my dad and tell him the same thing. And then Jim leaned over and said, so I guess coaching is a delayed gratification business. You never know when you're going to get through, but you're going to get through. And I think as I look at what you guys do for a living as coaches, it's a very inspiring, humble profession. It's also a delayed gratification business. So know you're doing great work, even if you don't feel it at times.
Awesome. Thank you. No, I appreciate that as well, Bernie. Ceci, yeah, last thoughts, last ideas. And, if we want to hear more about you, I know you have a couple projects you're working on as well.
Yeah, I don't like batting cleanup behind Bernie. That's hard. I would just say, realize as a coach at all times you're modeling, and it's a pretty amazing situation to be in. But how you interact, how you give feedback, how you build confidence sets the stage for so much for the athletes that you're around every day. So take pride in that, be deliberate in that, look into that, reflect on that. Certainly in the sports psych field, I think the thing you find is, and Bernie talked about it with his daughter, I certainly notice it, is that you realize you're doing things wrong all the time, and that's okay. We just keep working on getting better at them. So dig in, realize you're going to make mistakes just like your athletes do, continue to get better. And even you can point out those mistakes and fix them on the spot. But it's such an amazing role that coaches get to play. I certainly go back to mine, and they have been serious mentors and impactors of my life. So thank you for all that you guys do as coaches. And and then I am working on a project called the All Terrain Project. So it's allterrainproject.com. And there's a blog on there. It's an experiential project actually in North Carolina, which obviously is not running right now because no one's traveling and no one can hang out with each other. But hopefully we'll all be safe and get through this soon, and we can go back to doing land nav in the woods and learning about ourselves. So feel free to check it out. And then my Twitter is Edge Mentality on Twitter.
Awesome. Bottom line, we have an excellent chat here at Jiva Live, one of our best ever. Ceci, Bernie, Bill, thank you so much for all you have done. Again, I'm John Titus. Aaron Laban, thank you so much. Facebook people, we thank you for your comments and questions and everything you do for us as well. Jiva, if you didn't learn something today, you just weren't paying attention. So we thank you again for so much, and I appreciate everything again. So have a great evening and good night.
Thanks, John.
Good night. Thanks, John.